The moment I felt my spine compress against the concrete garage floor, I knew something had changed forever. Not just in my body, but in the way my family would look at me afterward. Uncle Marcus stood over me, his face twisted in that familiar rage, and the first words out of his mouth weren't an apology or concern for my well-being. They were a threat disguised as family loyalty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You tell anyone what happened here, and you'll destroy this entire family, Sage. You hear me? I was 17, lying on cold concrete with shooting pain radiating down my legs, and all I could think about was how the oil stain beneath my cheek looked like a map of somewhere I'd rather be. Anywhere but there. Anywhere but trapped in a family that valued silence over safety. But if you think this is just another story about family abuse and cover-ups, you're only seeing the surface. Because what happened next would expose a network of lies so deep, it would take 3 years, one determined physical therapist, and a paper trail that read like a criminal conspiracy to finally bring the truth into the light. My name is Sage Blackwell, and I've learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones strangers tell you. They're the ones your family wraps in love and calls protection. The accident, as they insisted on calling it, happened on a Tuesday evening in March. I was helping Uncle Marcus move some equipment in his garage when he flew into one of his rages. The official story would be that I slipped and fell while carrying a heavy box. The truth was that Marcus grabbed me by the shoulders and slammed me backward when I questioned why he was storing stolen construction materials in our family property. The impact sent shockwaves through my entire body, but the real damage wasn't just physical. As I lay there, barely able to move my legs, I watched my family choose their story before they even bothered to check if I was okay. My mother, Patricia, rushed over and immediately started coaching me on what to tell the paramedics. My father, David, began moving the stolen equipment while I was still on the ground. And Uncle Marcus? He stood there shaking his head like I had somehow inconvenienced him by getting injured. "Sage, honey, you slipped on that oil spot, remember?" Mom's voice had that edge it got when she was manufacturing reality. "You were carrying that box of old motor parts and your foot just went right out from under you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I felt something crack in my lower back, that my legs were tingling in a way that felt terrifying and wrong. Instead, I nodded because at 17, you don't always recognize the difference between family loyalty and family complicity. You just know that disappointing the people who are supposed to love you feels like the worst thing you could possibly do. The ambulance ride to Regional Medical Center was the first time I'd been alone with adults who weren't part of the Blackwell ecosystem in weeks. The paramedic, a kind woman named Janet, kept asking me detailed questions about what happened. Each time I started to answer honestly, I could hear Mom's voice in my head coaching me on the story. So I stuck to the script. I slipped. I fell. It was nobody's fault but my own clumsiness. At the hospital, the x-rays showed compression fractures in my L2 and L3 vertebrae. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Martinez, explained that I was incredibly lucky. A few millimeters in either direction and I could have been paralyzed. The injuries would heal, but I'd need months of careful rehabilitation and physical therapy. I'd probably deal with chronic pain for the rest of my life. "How exactly did this happen?" Dr. Martinez asked, studying the films with a frown. "These compression patterns are unusual for a simple fall." Before I could answer, Uncle Marcus stepped forward. "She was carrying a heavy box, lost her footing on an oil slick in my garage. Kids think they're stronger than they are, you know how it is." Dr. Martinez looked at me, waiting for confirmation. I nodded, even though every instinct in my body was screaming that this was wrong, that I should tell the truth. That adults who actually cared about children didn't manufacture stories about their injuries before bothering to see if they were okay. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in family manipulation disguised as concern. Mom took time off work to care for me, bringing me meals and medication and constantly reminding me how lucky I was that the family was rallying around me. Dad converted the downstairs den into a temporary bedroom so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs. Uncle Marcus visited every few days, always bringing some small gift and asking how I was feeling as if he genuinely cared about my recovery. It was Uncle Marcus who suggested I might be more comfortable doing my physical therapy at home instead of at the hospital's rehabilitation center. Family takes care of family, Sage. We don't need strangers poking around in our business when we can handle this ourselves. Mom agreed immediately. I used to be a nurse's aide, sweetheart. I can help you with the exercises just as well as any therapist. But Dad, surprisingly, pushed back. The doctor said she needs proper physical therapy. This isn't something we can just wing. David, she'll be more comfortable at home, Mom argued. And you know how those people are at the hospital. Always asking questions, making assumptions. Do we really want some therapist who doesn't know our family making judgments about what happened? That phrase, making judgments about what happened, hung in the air like a threat. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged, even indirectly, that our story might not hold up under scrutiny. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my pain medication. In the end, they compromised. I would do my physical therapy at Westside Rehabilitation Center, but only twice a week, instead of the recommended 5 times a week. The rest of my care would happen at home under Mom's supervision. It seemed reasonable to everyone except me. But at 17, recovering from a serious injury and dependent on my family for everything from transportation to basic care, I didn't feel like I had much choice in the matter. My first appointment at Westside Rehab was on a Thursday morning in April. Mom drove me, spending the entire 20-minute car ride reminding me that physical therapists were trained to ask a lot of personal questions, but that didn't mean I had to answer everything in detail. They're strangers, Sage. They don't understand our family dynamics. Just focus on getting better, not on entertaining their curiosity about your personal life. The rehabilitation center was smaller than I had expected. Housed in a converted office building with large windows and motivational posters featuring people climbing mountains and crossing finish lines. I was assigned to a therapist named Carmen Rodriguez, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and the sort of straightforward manner that made you feel like she actually listened when you talked. "Tell me about your injury," Carmen said after we'd completed the initial paperwork and evaluation. We were sitting in her small office, my file open on her desk between us. I recited the story I'd been practicing for weeks. The oil slick, the heavy box, the unfortunate slip that sent me crashing to the concrete. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in my file. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She said, "That must have been terrifying. How are you feeling about everything now?" It was such a simple question, but nobody had asked me how I was feeling about anything since the injury. They'd asked about my pain levels and my mobility and whether I needed help getting to the bathroom, but nobody had bothered to find out how I was processing what had happened to me.
Just ready to get better and move on. Carmen nodded, but I could see her studying me with the sort of professional attention that made me uncomfortable. Let's start with some basic assessments and see where we are. The physical evaluation was more thorough than anything I'd experienced at the hospital. Carmen tested my range of motion, my strength, my balance, and my pain responses with methodical precision. She asked detailed questions about what movements hurt and where, how my pain changed throughout the day, and whether I'd noticed any numbness or tingling in my legs. "Your injury pattern is interesting," she said as we worked through a series of gentle stretches. "Compression fractures like yours usually result from high-impact trauma or significant force applied along the spine's axis. A slip and fall typically creates a different pattern of damage." I felt my heart rate increase. "What do you mean?" "Oh, every injury is unique," Carmen said casually. "Bodies respond to trauma in all sorts of ways. I'm just trying to understand exactly what we're working with so I can design the most effective treatment plan for you." As the session continued, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't since the injury.
Carmen explained every exercise and stretch, told me exactly what each movement was supposed to accomplish, and constantly checked to make sure I wasn't pushing beyond what my body could handle. It was the first time in weeks that someone was treating me like I had agency over my own recovery. "How are things at home?" Carmen asked as we worked on some basic core strengthening exercises. "Are you getting the support you need?" "My family has been great," I replied, the words coming automatically. "They've really been there for me." That's wonderful. Family support makes such a difference in recovery. Carmen paused in her note-taking. "Are you doing any exercises or stretches at home between our sessions?" I described the routine Mom had developed for me, a series of basic movements she remembered from her nursing aid training years earlier. Carmen listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification about specific exercises or how often I was doing them. "It sounds like your mom is really dedicated to helping you heal," Carmen said. "Has she had experience with spinal injuries before?" "She used to work in healthcare," I said. "She knows about this kind of stuff." Carmen nodded, but I noticed she made several notes in my file. "Well, we'll want to make sure your home routine is complementing what we're doing here. Sometimes well-meaning family members can inadvertently interfere with professional rehabilitation if they're not working from the same playbook." The drive home was quiet. Mom asked how the session went, and I told her it had gone well. I didn't mention Carmen's questions about my injury pattern or her comments about family interference. I didn't mention that for the first time since the accident, I'd felt like someone was treating me as a person rather than a problem to be managed. "What did you think of the therapist?" Mom asked as we pulled into our driveway. "She seems nice, professional." "Did she ask a lot of personal questions?" I hesitated. "She asked about my home exercises and whether I was getting support from family." Mom's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her you guys have been great, that you're helping me with exercises at home." "Good." Mom's voice had that edge again. "Remember, Sage, these people don't know us. They don't understand how close our family is, how we take care of each other. If they start making suggestions about changing your care or asking too many questions about your personal life, you don't have to answer them. You're our daughter, not their patient in any way that matters." That night, I lay in my makeshift bedroom, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Carmen's questions, about injury patterns and family support, and the difference between professional rehabilitation and well-meaning family care. For the first time since the accident, I found myself wondering what would have happened if I'd told Dr. Martinez the truth in the emergency room. If I'd said that Uncle Marcus had grabbed me and slammed me backward in a rage over stolen construction equipment. If I'd trusted that adults outside my family might actually have my best interests at heart. But those thoughts felt dangerous, disloyal. The Blackwell family had always been tight-knit, protective of each other against outside interference. We handled our problems internally. We took care of our own. And if that meant sometimes keeping quiet about things that might be misunderstood by strangers, well, that was just the price of family loyalty. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine of twice-weekly therapy sessions at Westside Rehab and daily exercises at home under Mom's supervision. My mobility was slowly improving, and the constant sharp pain in my lower back was beginning to fade into a duller, more manageable ache. Physically, I was healing exactly as Dr. Martinez had predicted. Emotionally, things were more complicated. Each therapy session with Carmen left me feeling conflicted in ways I couldn't fully articulate. She treated me like I was intelligent and capable, asking for my input in treatment decisions and explaining the reasoning behind every exercise. She never made me feel like a burden or an inconvenience. When I mentioned that certain movements were difficult or painful, she adjusted my program immediately rather than suggesting I just needed to push through the discomfort. At home, my care felt different. Mom was attentive and devoted, but there was always an undercurrent of control to her concern. She monitored my medication schedule obsessively, even when I was capable of managing it myself. She insisted on helping me with basic tasks I could handle independently, like getting dressed or preparing simple meals. When I suggested that I might be ready to return to some normal activities, like driving to the library or meeting friends for coffee, she reminded me that I was still fragile and shouldn't rush my recovery. "You're not thinking clearly yet, sweetheart," she'd say, when I expressed frustration with the restrictions. "The trauma and the pain medication can affect your judgment. I'm just making sure you don't hurt yourself worse by doing too much too soon." Uncle Marcus continued his regular visits, always bringing some small gift and asking about my progress. He was particularly interested in my therapy sessions, wanting to know what exercises Carmen was having me do and what questions she asked during our appointments. "Physical therapists can be nosy," he said during one visit. "They think they need to know every detail about your personal life to do their job. But really, all they need to know is what hurts and what doesn't." Dad was the only one who seemed genuinely focused on my actual recovery rather than managing my story. He asked detailed questions about my therapy sessions because he wanted to understand what Carmen was teaching me and how he could support my healing at home. When I mentioned that Carmen had suggested I might benefit from additional sessions per week, Dad was immediately supportive. "If that's what the professional recommends, then that's what we should do." But Mom disagreed. "She's doing fine with twice a week. We don't want to overdo it and risk setbacks." "Patricia, if the therapist thinks she needs more intensive treatment, the therapist doesn't live with her. I see how tired she gets after those sessions. I see how much the travel wears her out."
Sometimes professionals don't account for the whole picture. I listened to these conversations with growing unease. It was becoming clear that my family's primary concern wasn't my healing, it was controlling the narrative around my injury and limiting my contact with medical professionals who might ask inconvenient questions. It was during my 6th session with Carmen that everything began to change. We were working on some advanced balance exercises when I mentioned that I'd been having headaches and trouble sleeping. "How long has that been going on?" Carmen asked, immediately stopping the exercise and guiding me to a chair. "A few weeks, I guess, since right after the injury." "Have you mentioned this to Dr. Martinez or to your family?" I shook my head. I figured it was just stress from everything that's happened. Carmen was quiet for a moment, studying me with that professional attention that had become familiar. "Sage, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that anything you tell me is confidential. Has anyone in your family ever hurt you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected. Somewhere deep down, I think I'd been waiting for someone to ask, but because hearing it out loud made everything real in a way that terrified me. "No," I said automatically. "No, my family loves me. They're taking care of me." Carmen nodded slowly. "I believe that your family loves you, but love and harm aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes people who love us still hurt us, either intentionally or unintentionally." I could feel tears starting to form, but I blinked them back. "I don't know what you mean. Your injury pattern, combined with some of the things you've told me about your home care and your family's response to your therapy, has me concerned. I've seen similar patterns in cases where family members were involved in causing the original injury." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You think my family hurt me?" "I think it's possible that someone in your family hurt you, yes. And I think it's possible that the story you've been telling about how you got injured might not be the complete truth." I stood up abruptly, ignoring the spike of pain in my lower back. "I need to go. My mom is probably waiting for me." "Sage, wait." Carmen's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to tell me. But you should know that I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse to the authorities." "This isn't child abuse," I said, backing toward the door. "This is just family. This is just how we handle things." "How you handle things?" I realized immediately that I'd said too much.
I mean, how we handle medical stuff. My mom used to be in healthcare. She knows what she's doing. Carmen stood up slowly, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening. I'm going to give you my card with my direct phone number on it. If you ever want to talk about anything, your injury, your family, your recovery, anything at all, you can call me, day or night. I took the card with shaking hands, stuffed it into my pocket, and walked out of the building as quickly as my healing spine would allow. Mom was indeed waiting in the parking lot, and I could see her watching me through the windshield as I approached the car. "You look upset," she said as I got into the passenger seat. "What happened in there?" "Nothing, just tired from the exercises." Mom studied my face for a long moment. "Did the therapist say something that bothered you?" I wanted to lie, but I'd never been good at hiding my emotions from my mother. She asked some weird questions about family stuff. "What kind of questions?" "Just whether anyone had ever hurt me, whether my family was supportive, stuff like that." Mom's entire demeanor changed. Her knuckles went white on the steering wheel and her voice took on that dangerous edge I'd learned to fear. She asked if anyone in the family had hurt you? I nodded, suddenly terrified that I'd made a terrible mistake by telling her. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her no. I told her you guys love me and take care of me." "Good." Mom started the engine, her movements sharp and angry. "That's exactly what you should have told her." The drive home was tense and silent. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom turned to face me. "Sage, I need you to understand something. These people, these therapists and social workers and medical professionals, they don't understand families like ours. They're trained to look for problems that don't exist, to break up families over misunderstandings and miscommunication. They get paid to find abuse even when there isn't any." The mention of CPS sent a chill through me. I'd heard stories about kids being removed from their homes, placed in foster care with strangers, separated from everyone they loved. The idea of being taken away from my family, even a family with complicated dynamics, was more terrifying than anything I could imagine. "I don't want that to happen," I said quietly. "Then you need to be very careful about what you say to that therapist. Stick to talking about your exercises and your physical recovery. Don't answer personal questions about our family. And if she keeps pushing, we'll find you a different therapist who understands boundaries." That evening, Uncle Marcus came over for dinner. The conversation was tense and loaded, full of meaningful looks and careful phrasing that made it clear everyone was on the same page except me. "Patricia tells me your therapist is getting a little too personal in her questioning," Marcus said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "It's probably nothing," Dad said. "Just routine questions they have to ask." "David, it's not nothing," Mom snapped. "She specifically asked Sage if anyone in the family had hurt her. That's not routine, that's fishing." Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "Sage, I need you to understand something. What happened in my garage was an accident. A terrible, unfortunate accident that we all feel horrible about. But it was an accident. Do you understand me?" I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. "If people start suggesting otherwise, if they start trying to make it sound like someone in this family would deliberately hurt you, they're not trying to help you. They're trying to destroy us, all of us." "Marcus," Dad said quietly, "she's just a kid. She doesn't need to hear this." "She does need to hear this, David, because if she doesn't understand what's at stake here, if she lets some therapist put ideas in her head about what happened that night, it won't just be me who suffers, it'll be all of us, the whole family." I excused myself and went to my makeshift bedroom, but I could hear them talking in the kitchen for another hour, voices rising and falling, Mom's sharp interjections, Dad's attempts at moderation, and underneath it all, Uncle Marcus's low, steady voice laying out exactly what would happen if I ever told anyone the truth about my injury. Later that night, alone in the converted den with the door closed, I pulled Carmen's business card out of my pocket. I stared at her phone number for a long time, imagining what it would feel like to call her, to tell her that Uncle Marcus had grabbed me and slammed me backward when I questioned his illegal activities,
to explain that my family's love came with conditions, and one of those conditions was keeping quiet about things that might make them look bad. But I also imagined what would happen after that phone call, the investigation that would follow, the questions that would be asked, the possibility of being removed from my home and placed with strangers, the destruction of the only family I'd ever known, complicated as it was. I put the card back in my pocket and tried to sleep. But for the first time since my injury, the physical pain wasn't what kept me awake. It was the growing realization that I was trapped in a situation with no good options. Tell the truth and destroy my family, or keep lying and destroy myself. What I didn't know yet was that Carmen Rodriguez wasn't the type of professional who gave up easily when she suspected a child was in danger. And I didn't know that the choice about whether to tell the truth wasn't entirely mine to make anymore. Because sometimes, when families choose silence over safety, other people have to choose courage over comfort. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in a room full of lies isn't the one asking questions, it's the one who refuses to stop asking them. The morning after Carmen's confrontation, I woke up to find Mom sitting in the chair beside my bed, fully dressed and holding a cup of coffee. It was barely 6 in the morning, and she never got up that early unless something was wrong. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday at your therapy session." I pulled myself up to sitting, wincing as the movement sent familiar aches through my lower back. "What about it?" "I think it's time we made some changes to your treatment plan. I've been doing research, and there are excellent physical therapists who do home visits. You wouldn't have to deal with the stress of traveling to appointments, and we could ensure you're getting care from someone who understands our family's values." The suggestion sent alarm bells ringing in my head. "But I like Carmen. She's helping me get better." "Sweetheart, Carmen doesn't know you like we do. She doesn't understand your personality or your needs, and frankly, some of the questions she's asking are inappropriate and potentially harmful to your recovery." Mom set down her coffee and leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, almost uncomfortable. "Sage, I need you to trust me on this. I've seen what happens when families let outsiders interfere in their business. It never ends well. People get the wrong idea, make assumptions based on incomplete information, and before you know it, everyone's lives are turned upside down over misunderstandings." "But what if Carmen reports what she suspects anyway, even if I stop seeing her?" Mom's expression hardened. "Let her try. She has no proof of anything because there's nothing to prove. You fell in Uncle Marcus's garage. That's what happened, and that's what any investigation would conclude." The confidence in her voice was unsettling. It suggested that she'd thought through the scenario in detail, planned for the possibility that someone might question our story. I wondered how many times my family had navigated situations like this before. What if they asked to interview Uncle Marcus? Or Dad? What if they want to see the garage where it happened? Then they'll see exactly what we've told them they'll see. An oil stain on a concrete floor where you slipped, a workbench where you might have been carrying heavy boxes, nothing that contradicts our account of what happened. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning air. "You've already cleaned up the stolen equipment, haven't you?" Mom's face went very still. "What stolen equipment?" "The construction materials Uncle Marcus was storing in the garage. The reason he got angry with me in the first place." "Sage, I don't know what you're talking about. Uncle Marcus doesn't have any stolen equipment. He's a contractor. He has legitimate business materials stored in various locations. If you thought you saw something suspicious, it was probably just the pain medication affecting your perception." The gaslighting was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment I almost believed her, almost convinced myself that maybe I had misunderstood what I saw that night. But I remembered the serial numbers I'd noticed on some of the equipment, the way Uncle Marcus had reacted when I'd asked about them. I remembered the rage in his face when he'd grabbed me, the panic in his voice when he told me to keep quiet about what I'd witnessed. "I know what I saw," I said quietly. Mom stood up abruptly. Her friendly demeanor evaporated. "You saw a teenage girl with a head full of nonsense getting hurt because she was careless and clumsy."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That's what you saw, and that's what you'll remember if you know what's good for you. The threat was unmistakable, even wrapped in maternal concern.
I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. But something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of my situation. My family wasn't just asking me to keep quiet about Uncle Marcus's moment of violence. They were asking me to deny reality itself, to rewrite my own memories to protect their version of events. Later that morning, Dad came to check on me before leaving for work. He seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact as he asked about my pain levels and whether I needed anything. "Your mother mentioned you might switch to a home-based therapist," he said, as he gathered his briefcase and keys. "She thinks it would be better for me." Dad paused in the doorway. "What do you think?" It was the first time in weeks that anyone had asked for my opinion about my own medical care. The question caught me off guard. "I think Carmen is a good therapist. She's helping me get stronger." "But you're comfortable with her? She's not making you feel pressured or uncomfortable in any way?" I could hear the careful phrasing, the way he was giving me an opening to voice concerns about Carmen without directly criticizing her. It occurred to me that Dad might be the only person in our family who actually wanted to know how I felt about my treatment. "She asks questions sometimes, personal questions about family stuff." Dad's expression grew more serious. "What kind of questions?" "Whether anyone has hurt me, whether I feel safe at home, things like that." "And how do those questions make you feel?" I thought about it carefully. "Scared. Not because of what she's asking, but because of how everyone else reacts when I mention them." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Sage, if someone in this family had hurt you, would you feel safe telling me about it?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could see the conflict in his face, the war between his loyalty to his family and his concern for my well-being. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to trust that he would choose my safety over family solidarity. But another part of me, the part that had been carefully conditioned over 17 years of Blackwell family dynamics, knew better. "Nobody in this family has hurt me, Dad. The therapist is just doing her job, asking the questions she's supposed to ask. But it makes everyone nervous, and I understand why." Dad nodded slowly, but I could see disappointment in his eyes. Whether he was disappointed in me for lying or in himself for not pushing harder, I couldn't tell. "Okay, well, whatever you decide about the therapist, just remember that your recovery is the most important thing. Don't let anyone pressure you into decisions that don't feel right." After he left, I lay in bed thinking about the conversation. Dad's question about feeling safe telling him the truth had revealed something important. He suspected, on some level, that our family story didn't add up. But he was also trapped by the same web of loyalty and complicity that held me. Even if I told him the truth, what could he really do about it? Confront Uncle Marcus? Destroy his relationship with his brother? Break up the family over something that was already done and couldn't be undone? The phone rang around 10 o'clock. Mom answered it in the kitchen, and I could hear her voice growing increasingly tense as the conversation progressed. "No, I don't think that's necessary. Sage is doing very well with her current treatment plan." There was a long pause. Then Mom's voice again, sharper this time. "I understand your concerns, but as her mother, I think I'm in the best position to determine what's appropriate for my daughter's care." There was a long pause again, longer this time. "If you feel you need to make a report, then I suppose that's your prerogative. But I want you to know that you're interfering with a family that has done nothing wrong, and you're potentially traumatizing a teenager who's already been through enough." When Mom hung up the phone, I could hear her pacing in the kitchen, muttering to herself. A few minutes later, she appeared in my doorway looking pale and angry. "That was your therapist. She's decided that she needs to file a report with Child Protective Services." My stomach dropped. "What kind of report?" "She's claiming that she suspects child abuse based on her conversations with you and her assessment of your injuries." I felt like I was going to be sick. What happens now? Now we deal with it. We tell the truth. We cooperate with their investigation, and we prove that this therapist has overstepped her boundaries and made false accusations against a loving family. Mom sat down on the edge of my bed, her demeanor shifting back to concerned and caring.
Sweetheart, I need you to understand that this is exactly what I was worried about. This woman has taken your normal recovery process and twisted it into something sinister. She's going to try to convince investigators that someone in this family hurt you based on nothing but her own suspicions and biases. But what if they believe her? They won't, because she's wrong. But they might ask you a lot of questions, and they might try to pressure you into saying things that aren't true. You need to be prepared for that. Over the next hour, Mom coached me on what to expect from a CPS investigation, how to answer questions truthfully without volunteering unnecessary information, how to stick to the facts of what happened without getting drawn into speculation or hypotheticals, how to present our family as loving and supportive without sounding defensive or rehearsed. Remember, you're the victim here. You were injured in an accident, and now some overzealous therapist is trying to turn your personal trauma into a criminal case. You have every right to be upset about that. Uncle Marcus arrived within an hour of Mom's phone call, moving with the kind of urgent efficiency that suggested he'd been expecting this development. He went straight to the garage and spent the next 2 hours cleaning and organizing, removing any equipment that might raise questions about his business practices. When he was finished, he came inside and sat down with me and Mom in the living room. His demeanor was calm and serious, like a general briefing troops before a battle. "Sage, I want you to know that I feel terrible about what happened in my garage. I should have been more careful about keeping that floor clean and dry. I should have insisted on helping you carry those heavy boxes instead of letting you handle them yourself." He paused, studying my face to make sure I understood what he was saying. "If anyone asks you about that night, I want you to remember that I was nothing but helpful and concerned. I was the one who called for the ambulance. I was the one who stayed with you until the paramedics arrived. I was worried sick about you."
What if they ask about why you were angry? Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "I wasn't angry, Sage. I was concerned about you trying to lift boxes that were too heavy for you. If I raised my voice, it was because I was trying to warn you to be careful, but you slipped before I could stop you." The revision of history was so complete, so confidently delivered, that I found myself questioning my own memories again. Had Uncle Marcus been trying to help me? Had I misinterpreted his anger as something more sinister? The pain medication and trauma could have affected my perception of events. But then I remembered the feel of his hands grabbing my shoulders, the deliberate force with which he'd slammed me backward. There was no misinterpreting that level of violence, no way to reframe it as accidental or well-intentioned. "I remember what really happened," I said quietly. Uncle Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What you remember, Sage, is a teenage girl getting hurt in an accident. That's the only thing that happened in my garage that night. Anything else is just trauma and medication playing tricks on your mind." "Marcus," Mom interjected, "she understands the situation. Don't you, sweetheart?" I nodded because it seemed like the safest option. But I was beginning to understand that my family's version of protecting me involved erasing my own experience of what had happened to me. They weren't just asking me to lie to outsiders. They were asking me to lie to myself. The CPS caseworker arrived the next afternoon. Her name was Diana Walsh, and she was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s with kind eyes and a professional but warm demeanor. She introduced herself to the family and explained that she was there to follow up on concerns raised by my physical therapist. "I want to assure everyone that this is just a routine investigation," Diana said as we gathered in the living room. "We take all reports seriously, but we also understand that sometimes there are misunderstandings or miscommunications that need to be clarified." Mom had prepared for this moment carefully. She was the picture of cooperative concern, offering Diana coffee and expressing her complete willingness to answer any questions that might help clear up the confusion. "We are as surprised by this as anyone," Mom said. "Sage has been receiving excellent care since her accident, and we've been nothing but supportive of her recovery." Diana asked about the circumstances of my injury, and I recited the story I'd been practicing for weeks. The oil slick, the heavy box, the unfortunate slip. Diana listened attentively, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions.
Can you tell me about your relationship with your family, Sage? How do you feel they've been supporting you through your recovery? They've been great, I said, the words coming automatically. My mom has been taking care of me, helping with my exercises, driving me to appointments. My dad converted the den into a bedroom so I wouldn't have to use stairs. Everyone has been really worried about me and trying to help. That's wonderful. And you feel safe and comfortable at home? Yes, absolutely. Diana made more notes, then asked to speak with me privately. Mom looked like she wanted to object, but Diana explained that private interviews were standard procedure in these investigations. Of course, Mom said graciously, whatever helps clear this up. Sage, just tell Diana the truth about everything, okay? Once we were alone, Diana's demeanor became slightly more direct. Sage, I want you to know that anything you tell me today is confidential. I'm here because someone who cares about you is worried that you might not be safe at home. I am safe, I said immediately. My family loves me. I believe that your family loves you. But sometimes people who love us can still hurt us, either intentionally or because they're dealing with their own problems. It was almost exactly what Carmen had said, and hearing it again made my chest tight with anxiety. Nobody in my family has hurt me. I was injured in an accident. Diana nodded. Can you tell me about your physical therapy sessions? How has that been going for you? Fine. Carmen is a good therapist. She's helping me get stronger. Has she asked you questions about your family or your home life? I hesitated. Some. She asked if anyone had hurt me, if I felt safe at home. Questions like that. And how did those questions make you feel? Confused, I guess. I didn't understand why she was asking them. Diana was quiet for a moment, studying me with professional attention. Sage, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is the story you've told me about your accident exactly what happened that night? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could feel my heart racing, my palms growing sweaty. This was my chance to tell the truth, to break free from the web of lies and complicity that my family had woven around me. But I could also hear Uncle Marcus's voice in my head warning me about what would happen if I destroyed the family over my own confused memories and traumatized perceptions. Yes, I said finally, that's exactly what happened. Diana made a note in her file, but I could see disappointment in her expression. Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell me about your injury or your recovery? Anything that's been troubling you or that you're worried about? I just want to get better and move on with my life. After Diana finished her interview with me, she spoke privately with Mom, Dad, and Uncle Marcus. I could hear the murmur of conversation from the living room, but I couldn't make out specific words. The interviews seemed to go well, with no raised voices or signs of conflict. When Diana was preparing to leave, she asked to see the garage where my accident had occurred. Marcus led her outside, pointing out the oil stain on the concrete floor and explaining how I'd been carrying boxes from his truck to the workbench when I had slipped. It's my fault, really, he said with his voice heavy with regret. I should have cleaned up that spill immediately. I never imagined someone could get hurt so badly from such a simple fall. Diana examined the garage carefully, taking photographs and making notes about the layout and potential hazards. She asked a few questions about the equipment stored there and Marcus's contracting business, but nothing that seemed to raise any red flags. Well, I think I have everything I need for now, Diana said as she returned to the house. I'll be filing my report with the court within the next week. Based on what I've seen and heard today, I don't anticipate any further action being necessary. After Diana left, the family gathered in the living room for what felt like a debriefing session. Everyone seemed relieved that the investigation was over, but there was also an undercurrent of tension that suggested we weren't completely out of the woods yet. You did very well today, Sage, Mom said. You were honest and straightforward, and I think Diana could see that we're a loving family dealing with a difficult situation. Uncle Marcus nodded. The important thing is that we stuck together and told the truth.
These outside agencies can be helpful when there are real problems, but they can also cause a lot of unnecessary drama when they misinterpret normal family dynamics. Dad was quieter than the others, sitting in his chair and staring out the window. When I asked if he was okay, he just nodded and said he was glad the whole thing was behind us. But I could see that something was bothering him. Some nagging doubt that Diana's investigation hadn't fully resolved. I wondered if he was having the same thoughts I was having, that we'd just successfully lied to a trained professional who was trying to protect children from exactly the kind of situation I was trapped in. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the day's events. Diana had seemed competent and caring, someone who genuinely wanted to help children in dangerous situations. But she'd been working with incomplete information, relying on my family to tell her the truth about what had happened to me. We'd presented ourselves as a loving, supportive family dealing with a tragic accident, and she'd believed us because we'd been convincing and consistent in our lies. I thought about Carmen, who was probably learning right now that her report had been investigated and dismissed. I wondered if she would blame herself for not pushing harder, for not finding a way to get me to tell the truth. Or maybe she would just chalk it up to another case where the system had failed to protect a child who couldn't or wouldn't protect herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two different professionals had suspected that I was being abused and had tried to help me. But because my family was skilled at manipulation and I was too afraid to tell the truth, their attempts to rescue me had actually strengthened my captor's hold over me. Over the next few days, life began to return to something resembling normal. Mom scheduled my next physical therapy appointment with a new therapist who worked out of a small clinic across town. She made sure to mention to the new therapist, Rebecca, that I'd had some difficulty with my previous therapist, who had become inappropriately personal in her questioning. Sage is a sensitive girl who's been through a lot, Mom explained during the intake appointment. She responds best to professionals who focus on her physical recovery rather than getting involved in family dynamics they don't understand. Rebecca was pleasant and professional, but there was a noticeable difference in her approach compared to Carmen. She focused exclusively on my exercises and physical progress, asking only basic questions about pain levels and mobility. She didn't inquire about my home life or family relationships, and she seemed actively uncomfortable when I mentioned anything that wasn't directly related to my spine injury. I found myself missing Carmen's broader approach to my care. She had treated me like a whole person rather than just a collection of damaged vertebrae. She had seemed genuinely interested in my well-being beyond just my physical recovery. But I also understood why my family preferred Rebecca's more limited scope of practice. Uncle Marcus continued his regular visits, but his demeanor toward me had changed subtly since the CPS investigation. He was more careful around me, more conscious of how his words and actions might be interpreted by outside observers. But there was also an underlying current of satisfaction in his behavior, a sense that he'd successfully navigated a dangerous situation and emerged unscathed. "You handled that whole thing really well, Sage," he said during one visit. "I know it was stressful having strangers poking around in our business, asking questions about things they didn't understand, but you stayed strong and told the truth, and that's what matters." He paused, fixing me with a steady gaze. "It's important that you remember how well this worked out, how the system investigated the claims and found them to be baseless. If anyone ever tries to put ideas in your head again about what happened that night, you'll know from experience that the truth always comes out in the end." The message was clear. My family's version of events had been officially validated by a government investigation. Any future attempts to challenge their story would be dismissed as the delusional fantasies of a traumatized teenager who had already been proven unreliable. But what Uncle Marcus didn't know was that Diana Walsh had left me her business card, just as Carmen had done. And what my family didn't realize was that their successful manipulation of the CPS investigation had actually taught me something valuable about how the system worked and how to navigate it more effectively. If I ever decided to tell the truth, I would need more than just my word against theirs. I would need evidence, documentation, proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And slowly, carefully, I began to think about what that evidence might look like and how I might begin to collect it. The first opportunity came during a family dinner about 2 weeks after the CPS investigation. Uncle Marcus was telling a story about a difficult client, complaining about people who didn't understand the construction business and made unreasonable demands about permits and paperwork. Some people think every piece of equipment has to have paper trail going back to the manufacturer, he said with a laugh. They don't understand that the real world doesn't always work that way. Dad looked uncomfortable. Marcus, you're being careful about documentation, right? Especially after what happened with Sage's injury and all the questions that got raised? Of course I'm being careful, David. I always have been. But there's a difference between being careful and being paranoid. What about those serial numbers Sage mentioned seeing, the ones on the equipment in your garage? Uncle Marcus's expression went very still. What serial numbers? She said she'd noticed some equipment with serial numbers that seemed suspicious. That's what she was asking you about when she got hurt. I could feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Mom shot me a warning look, but Uncle Marcus was focused entirely on Dad. Sage was confused and disoriented, David. She'd taken a hard fall and was in a lot of pain. She was seeing things that weren't there. But she mentioned it again during the CPS investigation. Maybe we should... David? Uncle Marcus's voice carried a warning that made everyone at the table go silent. There were no suspicious serial numbers because there was no suspicious equipment. Sage imagined something that didn't exist, probably because of the pain medication affecting her thinking. Dad looked like he wanted to push the issue further, but Mom intervened. Let's not rehash all of this again. The investigation is over, everyone is healthy and safe, and we need to focus on moving forward as a family. But the conversation had revealed something important. Dad had doubts about our story, and Uncle Marcus was worried enough to shut down the discussion aggressively. More importantly, the mention of serial numbers had clearly struck a nerve. That night, I excused myself early and went to my room. I pulled out a small notebook I'd been keeping hidden under my mattress and wrote down everything I could remember about that conversation. The date, who was present, exactly what was said, and how everyone had reacted. It was a small step, but it felt significant. For the first time since my injury, I was documenting the truth instead of just going along with my family's lies. I was creating a record that might someday help someone understand what really happened to me. Over the next few weeks, I began paying closer attention to conversations around the house. I noticed how Uncle Marcus and Mom would sometimes exchange meaningful looks when certain topics came up. I observed how quickly discussions about my injury got shut down when they started moving in directions my family didn't like. I began to see the patterns of control and manipulation that had always been there, but that I'd never recognized as abnormal. Most importantly, I started to understand that my family's love, while genuine, came with conditions. They loved me as long as I played by their rules, kept their secrets, and didn't threaten their version of reality. But the moment I stepped outside those boundaries, their love became something much more dangerous. The notebook I kept hidden under my mattress grew longer each week. I documented conversations, dates, inconsistencies in their stories, and moments when their carefully constructed facade slipped to reveal the fear and anger underneath. I didn't know what I would eventually do with this information, but I knew that collecting it was important.
Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I was beginning to plan for a future where I might need to prove what had really happened to me. And when that day came, I wanted to be ready. 3 months after the CPS investigation closed, I turned 18.
My family threw me a small birthday party, complete with cake and presents and speeches about how proud they were of my recovery and resilience. Uncle Marcus gave me a diamond necklace that probably cost more than most people's cars, and everyone commented on how generous and thoughtful he was. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the morning of my birthday at the county courthouse, filing paperwork to obtain copies of my own medical records. As an adult, I now had the legal right to access documentation that had previously been filtered through my family's interpretation. I wanted to see what the doctors had actually written about my injuries, what Carmen had documented in her therapy notes, and what Diana Walsh had concluded in her CPS report. The medical records arrived 2 weeks later in a thick manila envelope. I waited until I was alone in the house to open them, spreading the documents across my bed like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. Dr. Martinez's emergency room notes were more detailed than I'd expected. He documented not just my injuries, but his observations about the family dynamics he'd witnessed that night. Patient accompanied by mother, father, and uncle. Uncle appeared agitated and kept interrupting patient's responses to questions. Mother seemed coached in her responses and repeatedly emphasized that injury was a result of simple accident. Patient's account of events lacked detail and seemed rehearsed. More damning were his notes about my injury pattern. Compression fractures consistent with high-velocity impact along spinal axis. Unusual for slip-and-fall mechanism described by family. Pattern more typical of deliberate force applied from behind. Recommend follow-up investigation if patient reports additional incidents. Carmen's therapy notes were even more revealing. She documented every conversation we'd had, including my exact words when I described my family's reaction to her questions. She'd noted inconsistencies in my story, signs of coaching in my responses, and her growing concern about my living situation. Her final note, written after she'd filed her CPS report, was particularly heartbreaking. Patient appears to be victim of family-perpetrated abuse, but has been successfully conditioned to protect abusers. Despite clear evidence of trauma and manipulation, patient maintains family narrative. System failed to protect this child due to sophisticated family deception and patient's inability to disclose truth. We'll continue monitoring case informally in hopes patient finds courage to seek help in future. Diana Walsh's CPS report was the most professionally written, but also the most frustrating. She documented everything exactly as it had been presented to her, noting that while the initial report had raised concerns, her investigation had found no credible evidence of abuse or neglect. She'd interviewed all family members, examined the scene of the alleged incident, and concluded that my injuries were consistent with the described accident. But buried in the appendix of her report was a section that made my blood run cold. Note: family demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of CPS investigation procedures and appeared well prepared for interview process. Responses seemed coordinated and rehearsed. However, without patient disclosure or physical evidence of abuse, investigation cannot proceed further. Reading these documents felt like stepping outside my own life and seeing it from an objective perspective for the first time. 3 trained professionals had suspected I was being abused. 3 different people had tried to help me, and my family had successfully manipulated all of them through careful preparation, coordinated lies, and my own traumatized silence. But now I was 18. Now I had access to resources and legal rights that I hadn't possessed as a minor. And now I had something my family didn't know about: documentation that proved their story didn't hold up under professional scrutiny. I added copies of the medical records to my hidden notebook, which had grown into a substantial collection of evidence over the past few months. I had dates, conversations, inconsistencies, and now official documentation that supported my version of events. For the first time since my injury, I felt like I had the tools I needed to challenge my family's narrative. The opportunity came sooner than I had expected. Dad had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the family's handling of my injury, and his discomfort was starting to show in ways that worried Mom and Uncle Marcus. He'd been asking questions about Uncle Marcus's business practices, expressing concerns about the equipment that had been stored in the garage, and generally pushing for more transparency about what had really happened that night. During a particularly tense family dinner, Dad finally voiced what he'd clearly been thinking for months. "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to give me an honest answer.
Did you lose your temper with Sage that night? Did you grab her or push her in any way? The question hung over the dinner table like a bomb with a lit fuse. Mom immediately jumped in to defuse the situation. David, we've been through this. Sage fell. It was an accident. Why are you trying to turn this into something it's not? But Dad wasn't backing down this time. Because I've read the medical records, Patricia. I've seen what the doctors wrote about her injury pattern, and I've watched how this family has handled questions about that night. Something doesn't add up. Uncle Marcus set down his fork and looked directly at Dad. What exactly are you accusing me of, David? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about what happened. I've told you the truth multiple times. Sage slipped and fell while carrying a heavy box. I called for help immediately. That's what happened. Dad turned to me. Sage, I need you to tell me honestly, is that really what happened in the garage that night? The moment I'd been dreading and preparing for had finally arrived. I could see Mom's warning look, could feel Uncle Marcus's attention focused on me like a laser, but I could also see something in Dad's face that I'd never seen before, a willingness to believe me even if it meant challenging the rest of his family. Dad, I said quietly, what if I told you that it wasn't an accident? The silence that followed my question was deafening. Mom's face went white, Uncle Marcus's jaw tightened, and Dad leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff with no idea what was waiting at the bottom. I mean that Uncle Marcus grabbed me and slammed me backward when I asked him about the stolen equipment he was storing in the garage. I mean that he deliberately hurt me to shut me up about what I'd seen.
But Dad was focused entirely on Uncle Marcus now. What stolen equipment, Marcus? What was Sage talking about when she mentioned serial numbers? There was no stolen equipment. There were no suspicious serial numbers. Sage imagined the whole thing. Then you won't mind if I take a look at your current inventory? Check the documentation on the equipment you're storing? Uncle Marcus's face flushed red. I don't have to prove anything to you, David. If you don't trust your own brother, that's your problem. Actually, you might have to prove it to someone. I stood up from the table, my legs shaking, but my voice steady. Because I've been keeping records of everything that's happened since my injury. Every conversation, every lie, every attempt to silence me or discredit my memory. I pulled out my notebook and the medical records, spreading them across the dinner table like evidence in a courtroom. I have Dr. Martinez's notes documenting that my injury pattern was inconsistent with a slip and fall accident. I have Carmen's therapy notes showing her concerns about family abuse. I have Diana Walsh's CPS report noting that our family seemed unusually well prepared and coached for the investigation. Mom lunged for the documents, but Dad intercepted her. Let me see those, he said quietly. As Dad read through the medical records and CPS report, I could see his expression changing from confusion to anger to something that looked like grief. When he finished, he looked up at Uncle Marcus with eyes that held no trace of brotherly affection. Get out of my house, he said. David, you can't seriously believe... I said, get out, and don't come back until you're ready to tell the truth about what you did to my daughter. Uncle Marcus looked around the table, searching for support that wasn't coming. Mom was staring at the documents in horror, probably calculating how much damage they could do to the family's reputation. I was watching Dad with a mixture of relief and terror, amazed that he'd chosen my truth over family loyalty. This isn't over, Uncle Marcus said, as he gathered his keys and wallet. You're making a mistake that you'll regret for the rest of your life. After he left, the house felt different. The oppressive weight of secrets and lies that had hung over our family for months seemed to lift slightly, replaced by an uncertain but cleaner kind of tension. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Dad asked me. Because I was scared. Because everyone kept telling me that telling the truth would destroy the family. Because I was 17 and injured, and I didn't think anyone would believe me over Uncle Marcus. Dad nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Sage. I should have pushed harder when I first suspected something was wrong. I should have protected you instead of protecting him. Mom finally found her voice. David, you don't understand what you've done. Marcus is your brother.
He's been part of this family for 40 years. You can't just throw that away based on the confused memories of a traumatized teenager. Patricia, I've read the medical reports. I've seen the evidence. Our daughter was assaulted by my brother, and we've been covering it up for months. She fell, David. She had an accident. The investigation confirmed that. The investigation confirmed that we're very good liars. That doesn't make our lies true. The argument between my parents continued for hours, but I didn't stay to listen to all of it. I went to my room and called Carmen Rodriguez. Sage? Carmen's voice was surprised but warm. How are you doing? I'm ready to tell you the truth, I said. About everything. Carmen met me at a coffee shop near the hospital the next morning. I brought my notebook and the medical records, and I told her everything that really happened in Uncle Marcus's garage. I explained about the stolen equipment, the family's coordination to cover up the assault, and the months of gaslighting that had followed. I want to file a police report, I told her. But I need to know if it's too late, if there's any way to hold him accountable for what he did. Carmen was quiet for a long time after I finished my story. The statute of limitations for assault in the state is 2 years, so you're still within the window to file criminal charges. But it's going to be difficult to prove, especially since so much time has passed and the initial investigation concluded that it was an accident. What about the stolen equipment? If we can prove that Uncle Marcus was storing stolen goods, doesn't that support my story about why he attacked me? Potentially yes, but we'd need evidence that the equipment was actually stolen, not just your word that you suspected it was. I thought about this for a moment. What if I could get him to admit what he did? What if I could record him confessing? Carmen was concerned. Sage, I don't want you putting yourself in danger. If your uncle is capable of violence, confronting him could be incredibly risky. But it might be the only way to get justice, the only way to prove that I'm telling the truth. Let me make some calls, Carmen said. I know some people in law enforcement who specialize in domestic violence cases. Maybe they can advise us on the best way to proceed. Over the next week, I worked with Carmen and Detective Lisa Brennan from the Domestic Violence Unit to develop a plan. The idea was for me to arrange a meeting with Uncle Marcus, wear a recording device, and try to get him to admit what he did. It was risky, but it seemed like the only way to overcome the months of lies and cover-ups that had followed my assault. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a restaurant downtown where I felt safe, but where we could still have a private conversation. I'd told Uncle Marcus that I wanted to apologize for causing problems in the family and that I hoped we could work things out. Uncle Marcus seemed relieved that I was apparently ready to return to the family fold. He ordered coffee and spoke about how much he'd missed our relationship, how sorry he thought things had gotten so complicated. I never meant for any of this to happen, Sage, he said. I was just trying to protect the family from outside interference.
But you were asking questions about things you didn't understand, and I couldn't let you jeopardize everything I'd worked for. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. You mean the equipment you were storing there? That equipment represented years of careful planning, Sage. Contracts with suppliers who were willing to look the other way, relationships with people who could help me acquire materials without all the bureaucratic red tape. If you'd started talking about serial numbers and documentation, it would have brought down everything. So when I questioned you about it, you had to stop me. Uncle Marcus nodded. I grabbed you to get your attention, to make you understand how serious the situation was. I didn't mean for you to get hurt when you fell. But I didn't fall, Uncle Marcus. You slammed me backward onto the concrete. Uncle Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I lost my temper. I was scared and angry, and I reacted without thinking. But it was just a moment of poor judgment, not some premeditated attack. And afterward, you convinced the whole family to lie about what happened. I convinced the family to protect itself. Sometimes families have to choose between perfect honesty and survival. We chose survival. I had what I needed. Uncle Marcus had admitted to assaulting me, to storing stolen equipment, and to orchestrating the family cover-up. The recording device had captured every word. 3 days later, Detective Brennan arrested Uncle Marcus at his home on charges of assault,
receiving stolen property, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The arrest was covered by the local news, and within hours, several of Uncle Marcus's former clients came forward with their own suspicions about his business practices. The family's reaction was everything I'd expected and feared. Mom refused to speak to me, convinced that I'd destroyed our family over a misunderstanding. Several relatives took Uncle Marcus's side, arguing that I'd entrapped him and that his confession had been coerced. Family gatherings became impossible, holidays turned into battlegrounds, and the tight-knit Blackwell clan fractured along lines of loyalty and truth. But Dad stood by me throughout the entire process. He testified at Uncle Marcus's trial, supported my decision to press charges, and made it clear to the extended family that anyone who wanted a relationship with him would need to accept that I was telling the truth about what had happened. Uncle Marcus was eventually convicted on all charges and sentenced to 18 months in prison, plus restitution to the victims of his theft. The conviction made local headlines, not just because of the assault, but because the investigation had uncovered a network of stolen equipment worth over $200,000. During the trial, several other victims came forward with stories about Uncle Marcus's business practices and his pattern of intimidating anyone who questioned his methods. It became clear that my assault wasn't an isolated incident of lost temper, but part of a broader pattern of using violence to protect his criminal enterprises. The months following Uncle Marcus's conviction were some of the most difficult of my life. I lost half my family, including my mother, who couldn't forgive me for betraying Uncle Marcus. I had to find my own apartment and support myself financially since Mom cut off all assistance. I finished my physical therapy with Carmen, who had become not just my therapist, but one of my strongest advocates and friends. But I also experienced something I'd never felt before: the freedom that comes from living in truth instead of lies. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to carefully monitor my words or worry about accidentally revealing something that would upset the family balance. I could talk openly about my experiences, seek help when I needed it, and form relationships based on honesty rather than shared complicity. Carmen helped me connect with other survivors of family violence, and I began attending support groups where I met people who understood what it felt like to be betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. I learned that my experience, while traumatic and isolating, wasn't unique. Many survivors struggle with family members who choose loyalty over safety, who prioritize reputation over truth. 1 year after Uncle Marcus's conviction, I started college with a scholarship from a foundation that supported survivors of domestic violence. I majored in social work, inspired by the professionals like Carmen and Detective Brennan, who had helped me find my voice and seek justice. During my sophomore year, I began speaking at conferences and training sessions for medical professionals, therapists, and social workers about the signs of family-perpetrated abuse and the importance of persistent, compassionate questioning when something doesn't seem right. I shared my story not because I enjoyed reliving the trauma, but because I wanted other professionals to understand how sophisticated family manipulation could be and how important it was to trust their instincts when they suspected a child was in danger. Carmen often introduced me at these events, and she always ended her introduction the same way. This young woman's courage to speak truth in the face of family pressure not only saved her own life, but led to justice for multiple victims of her uncle's crimes. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do for our patients is refuse to stop asking questions, even when the answers are complicated and painful. I graduated college with honors and was accepted into a master's program in clinical social work. My thesis research focused on the long-term psychological effects of family-perpetrated abuse and the factors that enable some survivors to break free from cycles of silence and complicity. Dad and I rebuilt our relationship slowly but steadily. He went to therapy to process his own guilt about not protecting me sooner, and he eventually filed for divorce from Mom when it became clear that she would never acknowledge the truth about what had happened. We had dinner together every month, and he often told me how proud he was of the woman I had become. You saved yourself, Sage. But more than that, you saved other people who might have been hurt if Uncle Marcus had continued operating the way he was. That took incredible courage. Uncle Marcus was released from prison after serving 14 months of his sentence. I heard through family members that he'd moved to another state and was working construction under supervision. He never contacted me directly, and I never attempted to reach out to him. Some relationships can't be repaired, and some forgiveness isn't necessary for healing. Mom and I had no contact for 3 years after Uncle Marcus's conviction. The silence between us was painful, but necessary, a protective boundary that allowed me to heal without constantly defending my choices or reliving my trauma. When she finally reached out, it was through a letter delivered by Dad. In the letter, she wrote that she'd been attending therapy and had begun to understand how her loyalty to Uncle Marcus had caused additional harm to me. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to minimize what had happened, but she expressed genuine remorse for her role in covering up my assault and for cutting me off when I needed her support most. I chose my brother-in-law over my daughter. I can't undo that choice. But I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. You deserved protection, not punishment for telling the truth. We started with occasional phone calls, then progressed to brief coffee meetings. The relationship we rebuilt was different from the one we had before, more honest, but also more fragile, built on acknowledgement of harm rather than assumption of unconditional love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real in a way our previous relationship had never been. 5 years after my assault, I was working as a licensed clinical social worker specializing in trauma recovery. I had my own practice, a small apartment I loved, and a network of chosen family that included Carmen, Detective Brennan, several fellow survivors, and my father. I'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending that everything was fine. It meant building a life where truth was valued over comfort, where safety was prioritized over family loyalty, and where my own voice was stronger than the voices that had tried to silence me. Sometimes former clients or conference attendees asked me if I regretted speaking out, if I thought the cost of truth had been too high. My answer was always the same. The cost of silence would have been higher. Living with lies corrodes your soul in ways that take years to recognize and even longer to heal. Speaking truth, even when it's painful and complicated and destroys relationships you thought were foundational, is the only way to build a life that's authentically your own. Uncle Marcus had tried to bury my truth under family loyalty and manufactured reality, but truth has a way of surfacing, especially when someone refuses to stop digging for it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in the face of violence and manipulation is simply refuse to pretend it didn't happen. My spine healed, mostly. I still have occasional pain and stiffness, especially when the weather changes. But the deeper healing, the kind that happens in your soul when you stop carrying other people's lies, took longer and was much more complete. I learned that surviving trauma isn't just about getting through the initial event. It's about refusing to let that event define the rest of your story. Today, I help other survivors learn to trust their own memories, find their own voices, and build lives based on honesty rather than trauma. It's difficult work, but it's also the most meaningful thing I've ever done, because I know what it feels like to be trapped by family lies, and I know what it feels like to break free. And sometimes the best thing you can do with your pain is transform it into purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.